Hey everyone, it's Carissa Wiley for Pinkfresh Studio here today. Thanks for joining me. This month on the Pinkfresh blog, we are celebrating Christmas in July, so I have pulled out some of the fabulous new products from the July release to use on my card projects today. I'm going to be using this Home for the Holiday stamp set. I love the banner and the sentiments, and you can see it coordinates with that Cityscape die, which I'll also be using, but I'm going to show you how to use it along with the magical unicorn. I've also pulled out the Merry and Bright Toy Shop stamp set. It has some fun accessories that I'll be using, and I'm going to pull in some older products along the way as well. I'm starting out with some Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock, and I am just holding my Cityscape die in place on that with a little bit of delicate surface painter's tape. And the unicorn I am going to die cut from some Tim Holtz watercolor cardstock because I'm going to be watercoloring that. And once I get a couple of these die cut, I'm also going to run that Cityscape die through my die cut machine as well. I'm using the Gemini Junior here today, but you can use whatever die cut machine that you have. Now, usually I like to do my stamping first and then die cut, but with these unicorns, there are several images that are combined together that are stamped kind of in different colors and segments on these die cuts. So when I have a die cut like this, I like to actually die cut first, and then I use the negative space inside my mini Misty here. You can see I have the head and the body all lined up within that negative space. Then I can just pop my die cut into that negative space, and I know that those images are going to stamp perfectly on top of my die cut every time. This allows me to build several stamps on top of a single die cut, and it's my preferred way when I have to have all of these different elements line up together. Now for my stamping, I'm using the Gina K Amalgam ink pad. It is waterproof and Copic friendly, and since I'm going to be doing some watercoloring today, I thought I would go ahead and use that. You can use any permanent ink. Another one of my favorite permanent inks for watercoloring is the VersaFine Onyx Black Pigment ink. That is waterproof as well. You do want to make sure you heat set that before you watercolor. So I've grabbed a few of the Pinkfresh liquid watercolors. These are so beautiful. The colors are beautiful and they are so pigmented, but you do want to make sure that you give them a good shake before you use them. I have the bubblegum and the yellow, which escapes me the name, but I have several of the colors here. I'll be sure that I list them out for you. I'm just dropping them onto a craft mat, and then I'm taking my water brush and I'm actually dropping some water into each of these colors. You saw how very little of the watercolor I used, and I'm going to get great vibrant colors with these. Now that last one there on the end, that is actually the Licorice or the black watercolor, and I wanted to use that for shading, but to do that, I had to water it way down. So I'm just watering that down, and then I'm using that to add a little bit of shading along the bottom of my unicorn. I'm also mixing in some of the sky blue watercolor to give that kind of a blue-gray shading appearance. Now you saw when I first started out there, I had too strong of a color. I used a damp baby wipe just to pull up some of that color and kind of soften it just a bit. And then I just continued to water down my watercolors until I got the color that I want. Now for the mane and the tail, I wanted to create a rainbow color scheme, and I actually only used 3 colors to do this. I used the bubblegum, that yellow color, and the aquamarine. And I am allowing these colors to overlap, and when they overlap, it's going to give me my secondary colors, which is like your orange and your purple. Now, I went in with the bubblegum and then the yellow and then the aquamarine, and then I went back to the bubblegum to finish this off so that I would get that mix and create the purple as well. And like I mentioned before, I am just allowing those to overlap. And just to make it easy, I used a water brush to do all of my watercoloring. If you're more comfortable with a regular paintbrush and a little container of water, you could absolutely do that. So now that my unicorns are ready to go, I am going to create some felt embellishments for them. I'm taking the scarf stamp from the Magical Unicorn stamp set, and I'm actually just stamping it in a slightly darker color onto a little bit of this felt here. You can barely see it there. I'm going to do the same thing on this mint colored felt as well because I want to create 2 different scarves. And then I'm going to take my scissors and just fussy cut these out. Because there's not a separate die for the scarf, you will have to fussy cut these, but they're quite simple to fussy cut. The shapes are just kind of easy to go along with, and they don't need to be perfect. You're going to have a little bit of that white edge around it anyway, because when the stamp is stamped, you have the white edge on the die cut. So don't worry if you're a little outside of the lines. This is very forgiving. And I'm using some wool felt for this because I like the way it kind of holds up in die cuts. Now I played around with adding these tassel bows as well. They were a little too large for my unicorn. And now I'm pulling in the Brilliant stamp set, and I have this grouping of stars here. It has about 5 stars on it, and I only wanted 3 to stamp on the behind of my unicorn. So I went ahead and cut a couple of those stars off, and before I stamp these onto my unicorn, I'm going to make sure that that watercolor is good and dry, and then I'm going to prep the surface of my unicorn with a powder tool. And I'm going to stamp that little cluster of 3 stars on the behind of my unicorn, kind of like a little tattoo. And then I will take the horn from the Magical Unicorn stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that right onto my unicorn. Now you're going to notice I didn't do any masking. That's because I found it's easier just to stamp the entire horn. It is going to overlap on the top of the mane, but I can just take a dry paintbrush and knock away the excess embossing powder, and then it can look like it's sitting behind the mane or inside of that hair on top of the unicorn instead of overlapping the top of it. Then I just heat set my gold embossing powder. Now I have my unicorns ready to go, and I am going to use this Cityscape die to create a little background or window card for my unicorn. I just took my scissors and just kind of cut in a loose, kind of wavy pattern. I cut those buildings out of the bottom of that Cityscape die, and you can see now it has what looks like to be a snowbank instead. So think outside of the box with your die cuts. Think of how you can use them in other ways. This was very easy to alter with just some scissors, and now I have a completely different look for my card. To adhere my little felt scarves here, I'm just using a little bit of liquid glue. This is the Tombow Mono Multi Glue. You could also use the multi-medium matte finish. And once I have those adhered, I am going to start stamping on my card base piece here. So I have the banner piece here. I'm inking it up in some Versamark ink and stamping that down. And then I'm going to add my gold embossing powder over the top of it. And this just helps me see to line up my sentiment. Now, I've inked up my sentiment and stamped it inside of that banner. I have not heat set anything yet. As long as you don't touch that embossing powder, which your sentiment shouldn't, you can go ahead and just stamp that without heat setting the first layer first. And then you can heat set it all at once. It's just a little bit of a time saver. If you're more comfortable, go ahead and heat set that first layer and then stamp your sentiment. You just want to make sure that you don't overheat the embossing powder when you're kind of heating up the sentiment, because you can remelt it. And I find that it kind of loses its sheen a little bit if you overheat it. Now this star stamp is from the Brilliant stamp set as well, and I thought this was a fun alternative to snowflakes on the bottom of my scene here. So I've just inked it up in some light mint ink and just kind of stamped it along the bottom. It has kind of that really free-flowing, kind of wavy feel to it anyway, and I just thought that was a fun way to bring in a few more stars onto this card. Now you can see I have a piece of vellum. It doesn't have to be an oval. I just happen to have a die cut oval in my vellum scraps. I've prepped that with my powder tool, and I'm stamping this star stamp once again onto that vellum to where it's kind of gonna nestle beneath that banner that I created. And I'm using the same gold embossing powder and just heat setting that. Now to attach the vellum, I want a little bit of space between my card front and that vellum piece. So I am using foam adhesive on the back of this card front. And then I'm going to take, because I didn't feel like the banner was kind of jumping out at me enough, I'm just using a little bit of that same ink that I stamped the stars along the bottom of this card front with, and I'm using a water brush to pick up some of that ink off of a craft mat and add a little bit of color to that banner just so that it sticks out a bit more. I switched up my unicorn because it is very often that I change my mind when I'm crafting, and I thought that pop of red looked much better on this card. And you can see I trimmed down my card front just a bit, and now I'm using the old heart cutting trick that we all learned in like kindergarten, where you just kind of fold over a piece of paper. In this instance, it's felt, and I just trimmed out a little heart by hand. Now I've also stamped out a couple of these little like pine sprig gatherings. I don't know what they're called, but I've stamped them onto some Neenah Solar White, and I adhered it onto the unicorn scarf right there and kind of right behind that heart at the top as well. And for the berry accent, I'm using a little bit of the Tonic Jewel Drops in Carnation Pink. I finished this card off with just a few sparkling clear snowflakes. I thought that was a fun way to bring that snowy feel into here and kind of mix it in with the stars that are already on the card, and that finishes off my first card. Now for my second card, I'm using this Constellation stamp. This is a great kind of piece to use to kind of ground images. It does have kind of a star pattern in it, and you can see I have inked it up in two separate colors, a lighter kind of aqua blue and a little bit darker blue. And I'm just barely patting over the top with just like a super almost dried out baby wipe to kind of smooth out that transition. I'm not too worried about it being a super smooth transition because you can see that my unicorn is going to cover a large part of that. And then I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool so that I can stamp the star stamp from that brilliant stamp set once again. And I'm going to stamp this kind of cascading at an angle right through that Constellation stamp. Now this Constellation stamp has a star pattern on it, but let me just tell you a little trick. If you turn this over and stamp with the backside, you can have just a solid circle. So there you go. There's a way to get a little bit more out of your Constellation stamp. And then you can see I just went ahead and heat embossed those stars in gold right over the top of that piece. Now for my sentiment, I am using the banner once again from that Home for the Holidays stamp set. And I embossed it with some gold embossing powder onto some Neenah Solar White. And I'm using a tonic blending sponge just to blend some ink over the top of this embossing. So I used a lighter pink and a darker pink. I blended the lighter pink over the entire surface of the banner. And then that darker piece, I'm kind of concentrating along the bottom edge of the banner. And I'm going to go ahead and use my scissors once again to fussy cut this banner out. And I love the pop of pink on this card. Now you can see my unicorn here. I actually used some Copic markers to color this one. It does have the mint scarf, but I use the RV 21, 23, 25, and 29 to color the mane of this unicorn. And I just love that kind of mix of pink and red with that blue background. It really just pops. And you can see I'm just adding some shimmery accents with my Tonic Nouveau glitter pen here. I also finished the second card off with some sparkling clear snowflakes as well, and I just thought those were the perfect accent mixed in with those stars. I love how the stars can kind of feel like snow or like a little bit of magic is happening behind this unicorn, because we all know unicorns are magical, right? As always, I will have links to the featured supplies in the description at YouTube below, so be sure to check that out. But for more information, go over to the coordinating blog post. I'll have that linked below as well. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and links to all the supplies that I used for these projects. Thanks for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed this Christmas in July series featuring some of the new release from the Pinkfresh Studio July release. It has a bunch of different Christmas-themed products that you can also use throughout the year, and I can't wait to experiment with using this unicorn for maybe some birthday cards as well, and I have an idea for that, so stay tuned for that. As always, thanks for joining me and hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss any of the fabulous card making and paper crafting video tutorials. Until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.